Well, I think we might as well get started, and then as other people join, we can just admit them and they can join in on the conversation. We are going to tape this and put this up on our website. So I want to introduce myself. I'm June Younger. I'm the Chamber Coordinator here at the Commerce City Chamber. And today we have our City Manager, Brian McBroom, with us. Just so that we can find out what is happening in the city during the time. So, Brian, why don't you give us a little rundown of what's been happening there at the city, and then we can do maybe a Q&A. If you have questions, you can unmute yourself, and then he can answer them. Take it away, Brian.
Well, thank you, June, and hello again to everyone. Thank you for inviting me to share what's going on in city government. As you might expect, things are changing rapidly. So when I provide updates to the City Council, I don't prepare a long PowerPoint presentation anymore, because by the time between preparing it and presenting it, the information in the presentation is outdated. So I have some notes I'll walk through verbally, but then happy to answer any questions that any of you have. For those that don't know me, my name is Brian McBroom. I'm the city manager for the city of Commerce City. My role is to be the chief administrative officer for city government. So I report to a 9-member city council. The city council hires me as a body, so I have an employment agreement with the city council. I'm an appointed official. City council also hires the city attorney and the municipal judge. So it's my job then, once the city council appointed me as the city manager, my job is to run the organization. And in the case of Commerce City, we have about $100 million annual budget. We have about 400 budgeted full-time positions in city government. Only about 370 of those positions are filled right now. We have about 30 vacant positions. And then, believe it or not, we have almost that many part-time employees. Part-time employees, which we term variable hour employees, are really how we operate our rec centers and our pool. It's a cost-effective way for us to operate those facilities. So we have about 300 variable hour employees right now as well. So that's a quick overview of city government, but I'm happy to answer any questions about that once I get to the end. I'll run through some notes here that talks more specifically about city government in the time of this crisis. And if I go too fast or don't touch on something, please just ask away when I'm done. This won't take but 10 minutes or so to walk through my notes. So in the case of this crisis, an initial question might be, what is city government's role? Most important thing to note is we're not a public health organization. So city government has not issued any public health orders. We are subject to the public health orders that are issued by other levels of government. So our role during the crisis is to perform as many city functions as we can. And I'm proud to say most of our city operations are still functioning. Notable closures, though, are our 2 rec centers and our decision to close our outdoor pool for the summer. So those are key facilities that we're not operating, but most other aspects of city government are still functioning. It's also, we believe, our role to help the community mitigate the impacts of this crisis, and I'll talk about that here in a couple of minutes. We do have the opportunity to provide input in the public health orders. The public health orders that have impacted all of us in our community have either been issued by the Tri-County Health Department or the state of Colorado. Most of the orders that have impacted us have been issued by the Tri-County Health Department. We've had an opportunity, not only staff, but council members have had an opportunity to provide input, but we're not voting members of the Tri-County Health Department. And we also don't have the opportunity to vote on any of the state orders, but we do have an opportunity to provide input and feedback on orders that have already been issued. We have some limited responsibility to enforce public health orders. Public health orders are are not laws. Our role in the enforcement process is not as clear as I would like it to be. It puts our police officers in some difficult situations when the public has an expectation that we're able to enforce these like a law, but they're not quite like a law. I hope you don't have a lot of questions about that, because you would need our city attorney to answer those questions. We've not been put in a position to enforce the orders much. When we've been called out, when there's a question about a person or an entity following orders, we've tried to encourage and educate, and then in some cases refer them to a public health agency. Is everybody familiar with the Tri-County Health Department? Is it useful for me to, okay, I won't go through, I had a couple of things here just to explain what Tri-County Health is, but it sounds like you have an idea what their role is. So a little bit of history of city government going back to March 12th. March 12th was the day that city facilities were closed to the public. It's also the day that we activated our Emergency Operations Center and stood up our Incident Command Team. So our Incident Command Team is made up of city employees who take on a separate role during emergency events. So that team activated March 12th. The next day on March 13th, City Council held a special meeting. That was a Friday night. And they canceled all regular City Council meetings and all study sessions. A lot of communities were doing the same thing at about that time. When we activated our Incident Command Team, we essentially began running two parallel organizations in city government. So we had a group of employees that were focused strictly on the incident and working with the Incident Command Team. And then most all other city employees had some role on the Incident Command Team, but then we also had responsibilities to perform our normal duties. So I like to think of it as sort of creating two parallel organizations. And we've been functioning that way ever since. Some employees are only responding to the incident and managing the crisis. Most of us have an administrative role. Me, for example, I have responsibility to make some decisions Incident Command Team makes, but an overall responsibility to oversee their work. Plus, I also have my job being the Chief Administrative Officer of normal city government functions. By the end of March, at least half of our employees were working remotely. Given the nature of our work, a lot of our employees cannot work remotely. Our public works folks who are out doing maintenance work in the community, taking care of streets and maintaining grasses now that we're in the growing season, they have to be at work to perform their functions. Same with all of the folks within our police department. There are a few that have been able to work remotely, but for the most part, all of our public safety folks are reporting to work. Just about all of the rest of city employees have been able to work remotely since then. And we expect to be in that condition for at least weeks, maybe months. The good news is we've been able to shift to doing a lot of things remotely with City Hall closed, and I think still maintain a pretty high level of service. It's not the same level of service to every customer that we can provide if City Hall was open, but I'm pretty pleased with how well we've been able to shift to this remote work model and get most functions done. We also early on began some specific outreach work to seniors in our community. We know when we close city facilities, that's a real challenge for seniors in our community who rely on our facilities to stay connected to each other. Plus, given the nature of this crisis, it's a public health crisis, we wanted to stay in close touch with seniors in the community. So city employees and members of our senior commission started calling seniors on a regular basis, and we're still doing that. We also began some pretty heavy outreach work to the business community, trying to make them aware of what these public health orders are, putting information on a website that we created to provide resources to businesses within our community. So I'll shift then to what are some things we're doing currently. So that was a bit of history of what's happened over the last couple of months. Some key things we're doing currently, we've really added a third area of work in our organization. So we have our response team that's responding to the crisis. We've got all of us trying to keep normal operations going. And then we've also, while we're still responding to the crisis, we've began trying to figure out how to recover from it. Not only us as city government, but we're very much involved in countywide efforts to reactivate the economy in Commerce City and throughout Adams County. So now we sort of have three parallel organizations working together within city government. As I mentioned, most city operations are still functioning. The 2 rec centers are a notable exception. We really don't have any idea when our rec centers will be able to open. We're constantly receiving new guidance from Tri-County Health and the state. The state is telling us that they will have good data by May 18th, data that takes into account the effect not only the stay-at-home order had, but the safer-at-home order has had. The data lags about 2 weeks, and the state's been in their safer-at-home mode for about 2 weeks. And May 18th, they think they'll have pretty good data to know how effective the safer-at-home order has been. So we expect some new guidance on May 18th. But I think rec centers are going to be a challenge. Every indication we've gotten from Tri-County Health and the state is that social distancing is going to be with us for quite some time. So it's possible that we could open our rec centers. The question will be opening them in the way that meets all of the public health guidelines may or may not be a good idea. We're going to have to see what the restrictions are. An example I can give you is the golf course. We opened the golf course a couple of weeks ago. We closed it on March 12th, kept it closed until just a couple of weeks ago. We're able to open it and operate it, provided we meet a bunch of guidelines from Tri-County and the state. And we think it's going okay. And that'll be the challenge with the rec centers. What are the rules we'd have to operate under, and does that make sense for us? And it's the same challenge every community has. So we'll be eager to see what those new guidelines are, what new direction we get from the state on May 18th. City Council did approve several assistance programs for the Commerce City community. I'm sure the Chamber knows about our microloan program. We've contributed $400,000 to a microloan program that's being operated by Adams County. The $400,000 that we've put into that program is specifically for Commerce City businesses. The loan amounts are up to $25,000 by partnering with Adams County. Adams County is invested in it to bring the rate down and lower the loan fees. City Council also approved 2 grant programs, one for small businesses and the other for nonprofits that are operating in our community. Those are grants up to $5,000. We had more applications than money initially for the small business grant program. That deadline was Monday at 5. We did not have as many applications on the nonprofit side. So in both cases, we intend to do a second round of those grants. The total money that City Council allocated, we divided it into 2 pots. We could do a first round, and then a few weeks later, we'll do a second round for those businesses or nonprofits that weren't able to get an application in on time or didn't hear about it. We want to make sure there's ample opportunity for folks to apply for that assistance. And then always possible that the city will put some additional money into both of those programs down the line. So initially, they've authorized about $1 million in a combination of the loans and those 2 grant programs. Let's see, we're still actively trying to connect with seniors, make sure if they have needs, we know about that and connect them. We can connect them to resources or help provide resources ourselves. I want to take a moment to thank the Commerce City Chamber. I understand through our employees that the Chamber provided some hand sanitizer to counter estates. It might seem like a small thing. It wasn't a small thing to us. Those things are a big deal. Not only was it really helpful for Contra Estates and the residents there, uh, but it creates a great word of mouth about the Commerce City Chamber, that you're far from just being a business advocacy group. So thank you very much for that. Um, we So we are focusing on what it means for us to recover from this. For us, our focus has been, how do we reactivate suspended operations? Opening up City Hall will be much easier again than opening up our rec centers. City Hall will likely open back up to the public in phases. Probably will not go from being closed to being open Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. We will likely open it up 2 or 3 days a week. Primarily what's missing in our service delivery is the ability for people to come in and talk to a city employee in person. So our permit counters, our counter that allows people to pay taxes in person. So those are things we haven't been able to do since March 12th. So we will begin to reactivate those things on a limited basis. The first thing that we'll reactivate is our municipal court. We're getting way behind to be able to make decisions on tickets we've issued. Normally, Commerce City holds municipal court 2 days a week, and it's a full docket both days. So we'll be starting this month. There's 4 trials we have to conduct by the end of the month. It's possible some of them may get dismissed. If they're not dismissed, there's a separate state law that entitles defendants to a speedy trial. And so we're making some modifications to council chambers now, which serves as our courtroom to be able to hold trials and do them safely. And then early June, we'll start with limited court dockets. We probably get 50 to 75 people in the morning and in the afternoon. Each day we have court. We won't be able to accommodate that many people in the courtroom. So we're having to figure out how many people can we accommodate in the court and do it safely. But that'll start in June. We're still kind of figuring all the details of that out. A quick note about the city's financial position. We are estimating our revenue loss at somewhere between 10 and 25 million over the course of the year. We don't have great data yet either. Our taxes are remitted and booked in arrears, so our revenues lag about a month behind. Currently, they're lagging 6 to 8 weeks behind because we've provided some grace periods to taxpayers. So we haven't really seen the full revenue impact. We're getting bits and pieces of information as we see tax remittances in the end of March into early April. So that's why our range of revenue loss is such a large range. We just don't have great information yet, but we've started to plan for changes we would need to make to city government to accommodate perhaps as much as a $25 million loss. And again, for context, our annual budget is about 100 million. Significant revenue loss for us. We're working on budget cuts in the neighborhood of, we think we could cut about 10 million out without cutting extremely critical services. What's critical and what's not is difficult to decide in situations like this, but we're working on a plan where we could cut up to 10 million out of the expense side of our budget. We have received about $5 million so far in federal assistance to city government. So that helps with that revenue loss. And then we also have about $40 million in reserve funds. So I think the city's in a good position to weather the storm financially, given we don't know exactly how long this will last. So each week that we see tax remittance data from our finance department, our ability to project it gets a little bit better. Let's see, City Council has also started holding regular City Council meetings on the first and third Mondays of the month via Zoom. It's not ideal, but it's better than not meeting. You're experiencing that too. This is this is great to be able to meet in this format. Not quite the same as if we were all in the room together. But for City Council, they're getting better each Monday they meet at conducting critical business. Focus those meetings on critical business. We've put in the parking lot, as we've termed it, a bunch of things City Council probably needs to see an act on that we've determined aren't critical business. So we have a long list of things that are stacking up with City Council as well. But I think they're functioning very well in the Zoom format. New development in Commerce City, believe it or not, has stayed pretty steady. We are as busy on the development review side as we were a year ago. I can't quite explain that. I'm very surprised by that. Either it's purely the strength of the desire to develop in our community, or it's a belief on behalf of the development community that we're going to pull out of this and the economy will be back where it was prior to mid-March. But we're still seeing quite a few development applications, developers that are submitting, wanting to go through the development process. We've issued a ton of permits. We're still doing as many inspections as we did this time last year. We've had to change how we do them a bit to protect construction workers and our employees. We've been able to figure out how to do that. So that was longer than 10 minutes. Sorry about that. I had said I thought it would take me 10 minutes to run through those, but it took me more like 20. So I'll stop there and see what questions you have about things I didn't talk about or maybe more detail on something I mentioned.
Well, let me just mention that we have the free version of Zoom here. So we have to go by 30-minute increments. I have already emailed everyone the next meeting that you can go and log into right at 12:30 when they kick us off for any additional questions. But I do have a question, Brian, about I've noticed that some of the other cities have entered into intergovernmental agreements with Adams County on the CARES money that they're receiving. Has Commerce City done that, and how much do you expect money-wise from that?
So Adams County received $90 million in CARES Act funding. They made the decision to divide 45% of that amongst the 8 jurisdictions within Adams County. Our portion of that, which City Council approved on Monday night, we had to enter into an intergovernmental agreement with Adams County. Our portion of that was about 4.6 million. So I mentioned in my remarks, we've gotten about $5 million. Most of that is this 4.6, 4.7 in direct funding from Adams County. Also, the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development that administers the Community Development Block Grant Program, they've awarded us an additional about $250,000 to be added to our annual CDBG allocation. So that 4.6, 4.7 plus the 250 in additional CDBG funds is how I came up with that roughly 5 million in federal funding. Most of that CARES Act funding, the 4.7, the other 250 CDBG. We are aware that the federal government, I'm sure you've heard this too, they're working on a CARES Act 2.0 is what they're calling it. We do expect some additional funding for local government in that package. But, we don't know the details of that yet because they haven't made any final decisions yet.
Brian, I have a question. With the packages that you've put together for the grants, is the food bank separate? How do the food banks apply for that?
Great question. In addition, it was really $1 million, $1,050,000. On April 20th, I asked the City Council to let me spend $50,000 up front. We're in the process of distributing checks to the 4 food banks in Commerce City right now. So
Oh,
and
they didn't have to apply? You're just gonna.
they did not have to apply.
Okay.
Actually, checks I think were mailed Tuesday, so
Okay.
they'll be receiving those checks today or tomorrow, I would think. So they do not need to apply. They could apply for additional funding. It was my feeling that a quick shot of funds for the food banks directly was the quickest and best way for us to benefit the community quickly.
Okay.
And
All
actually,
right.
the fish food bank is one
Right.
of them that we
Yeah,
sent money to.
that's what I was asking about. Thank
That's a
I
you.
good
have a
question.
question, Brian.
Yes, sir.
If all of our council people are healthy at this present time, is there a process where they can be have their temperature checked and everything, and start doing, and everybody's come in and start doing regular council meeting? Because in this length of time, if none of them have been sick and none of them show that they're asymptomatic, can they get their temperature checked and then the council meetings go back to the chamber instead of on Zoom? Because it would seem like it would be an easier process for everybody unless they're afraid to come in.
Well, that's a good question. We started last week screening employees that are reporting to City Hall for work. We've had a face coverings order for city employees for 3 weeks or so, started screening last week. So every employee now that reports to a city facility has a temperature screen. So we're starting to get better at managing systems for screening employees. We're looking at kiosks that can do that more quickly. Right now, we're just using an infrared thermometer at key employee entrances. So I think it'll be possible in the not too distant future. The challenge is meeting in council chambers and maintaining social distancing when we don't know how many people are physically going to show up for the meeting. City council, I think, is, we've not talked about this specifically. I do think most of them are eager to get back to meetings in person. They're not crazy with the Zoom format either. It allows us to conduct critical business, but it's tough to have sort of a heavier policy discussion in the Zoom format. And we're missing out on our study sessions, which is where council does a lot of wrestling with the most complicated policy issues, and they haven't been able to do that either. Study sessions in a small conference room seem more problematic and will probably take longer for us to do. Meetings in council chambers could probably happen sooner, but we don't have a timeline yet. This trial run of doing some trials in the courtroom, trying to figure out how to manage a docket of defendants in the municipal court, will help us test some of this stuff out and figure out how we could do a council meeting. But right now, the council meetings are still going to be on Zoom for the, we're constantly talking about it though, but I couldn't tell you when we might be able to meet in person in council chambers.
Another question I had, did of all of our employees, did we have many employees that came down with the virus, or did we keep a pretty healthy city employee staff?
That's a very good question. To my knowledge, we've just had one employee who's been diagnosed as having COVID-19. What's tricky about us as an employer, as it is for any employer, is balancing that employee's right to privacy under HIPAA and every other employee who would want to know if they were in contact with an employee who's tested positive. So we've only had to navigate that once. And so that employee is home. I don't, from what I understand, not a serious case, but did test positive.
I do have a question too, about the, you know, Denver, Wheat Ridge, they've all mandated face coverings when they are coming out to the safer at home. What is Commerce City going to do?
Well, it's a good question. Some cities have done it. We think we do have the authority to do it. Our city council has not taken the topic up yet. Interestingly, though, Tri-County on Monday decided not to adopt the face coverings order for the Tri-County region that they serve. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about why they did that. I was on a call with Tri-County Health, their executive director, Dr. John Douglas, last Thursday, just a week ago. And he said the science indicates that face coverings reduce the chance of transmission by 50%. So I think their decision not to mandate it was more about allowing cities to make their own decision or allow counties to make their own decision. I don't know yet what we would do. Our council hasn't taken it up. What Tri-County did commit to is providing a lot of information to places of business, allowing places of business to make their own decisions, and then supporting those decisions through a lot of education out in the community. There's, I could see that requiring face coverings, either city, county, or by business, will be challenging to enforce. From what I'm seeing around the country, it's been much more contentious than stay-at-home orders, it seems to me. Trying to make customers leave who won't wear a face mask, calling the police to remove somebody for not wearing a face mask. But we may be there. We also keep hearing a second wave of the virus is coming in September, and it may be worse than the initial wave. So the short answer to the question is we haven't really discussed it yet. But again, Tri-County just decided this week they weren't going to require face coverings. So our council members may want to take the issue up.
Anyone else have a question?
I do. Brian, can you hear me?
Yes.
How was the response on the money that you allocated to help businesses? Did you get a good response?
Yes, in rough numbers, I'm trying to remember from memory, the first round we allocated 40 grants of $5,000 each for small businesses. We had about 50 applications.
Okay.
For nonprofits, I'm trying to think, I think it was 20 grants of $5,000, and we did not get 20 applications. So we'll have to get busy promoting that for round two. Whatever money isn't spent in round one, we'll just add it to round two. We were concerned. Westminster did a grant program, and they were oversubscribed with applications within like 36 hours. We did get, I think, 50, maybe it might have been a little over 50 applications, but it took us up until the deadline to get that number.
That's a great program. Thank you for doing that.
Well, and I'm sure you saw there was a second round of payroll protection program funding through the federal government. I expect there will be more from this CARES Act 2.0. We just don't know how much yet. I also heard that wasn't the easiest program to apply for either. So there may be some businesses that missed out just because it was a complicated application process.
Well, you do have to have good records when you do that, and maybe some businesses don't have that.
We also envisioned our grant programs as being a bit of a gap filler. The reason we didn't want to roll out programs at the same time that PPP program rolled out was our thinking was, let's try to help businesses that maybe haven't got as much assistance as others. And that factored into how we're scoring the applications. But it's still a subjective process, and if there's applications, if people's applications aren't approved, there will be some frustration there, I'm sure.
So what about individual families? I thought I read something that they could apply for a loan or something. Was that?
Well, the program we're looking at right now, I mentioned this almost $250,000 in additional CDBG funds.
Right.
We are looking at a rent and mortgage assistance program that we can put that money towards. We've talked to 3 different nonprofits who run programs like that. So we're just trying to figure out which one we think would be the best for us. And then that 250, if that came out in say $1,000 grants to help folks with rent or mortgages for a month or two, that money would go a long way. That seems to me the best way, in addition to the food banks. Now, I don't know, to be honest, which nonprofits applied for grants, but the goal is to give those grants to nonprofits that will provide direct assistance to residents in the community. That was the purpose of the food bank money. And again, this mortgage and rent assistance seems to me a really good way to provide direct assistance to residents.
Thank you.
So could you tell us, like, who exactly are the ones who, decided that they were going to give these grants? Do you have a committee?
City staff laid out a program for nonprofit grants, small business grants, and the small business loans. City council endorsed it. We developed criteria by borrowing a lot of information from other cities and counties that are doing similar programs and modified it for our purposes. And then we have a group of staff that is going through and scoring the 2 sets of grant applications, and we're aiming to have decisions completed by the end of the day tomorrow. So by the end of this week. And again, it's any grant program like that has some subjectivity to it. We've tried to develop criteria that help us meet the intent of the program, which is sort of stopgap assistance for small businesses and money for nonprofits that are directly helping residents mitigate the impact. Doing this in 2 rounds will allow us to do an initial round, do some evaluation, and then dial it in for round 2. And then again, I think it's somewhere between possible and likely that we'll do yet another round after this, the second round. This second round will take us through the money that City Council has allocated so far, the initial $1 million. But if we don't pull out of this pretty soon, my guess is there will be, we'll go back to council and ask for a different allocation to do a separate set of grants. Certainly, if you folks hear things from businesses or nonprofits that were involved in this process, any feedback we get is useful. So any tidbits you hear, pass them along, because it'll help us again continually work to improve it to meet the intent.
Brian, I was going to ask you, you mentioned the 40 million in reserves. Over at the water district, you may remember I'm a director on the water district over there. We've got like $75 million or something stupid tied up, and we're not allowed to touch it because it has to be there to meet bond payments and there's all these rules and all these requirements, and it's not one $75 million block. But when you add up all the money we've had to set aside that we're not allowed to touch, so that we have it in case of an emergency, it's 75 million. And my question is, what constitutes an emergency if not this? Like, to me, this is why we've built up those funds over all these years. And I don't know if you guys have looked into addressing that yet or not.
Well, a good question for us that we've wrestled with. On the one hand, we've got actually 40 millions, it's somewhere between 40 and 50 million in unrestricted reserves, which means they're not they're not mandated for a specific purpose. One argument is, well, if this isn't a crisis, what is? Let's put it all into play to mitigate the impact. The reason I'm still pretty stingy with that reserve money is we don't know what other crisis could be around the corner.
Right.
Well, that's an ultra conservative view, but we are typically our emergencies are weather related. We made it through winter without any bad storms, but now we're in the summer season where we could have bad storms. The last really big disaster we had was the flood in 13. So it's there for emergencies. This is an emergency. We will likely spend some of it. But to play it ultra safe, I would rather make expense cuts and minimize how much of the reserve funds we have to dip into. I'll tell you from my perspective anyway, this is the first time I've been a city manager. So I've never been a city manager in an organization that manages a water and sewer department. They're a different animal, as you know, Michael. An emergency for the water district could be a treatment plant that fails and has to be rebuilt. You know, our emergencies aren't, we would not have, it's less likely we'd have some sort of catastrophic event like that where we have to lay out a whole bunch of cash right away to rebuild a facility. If we had some disaster that wiped out a rec center, it would be awful, but we wouldn't have to drop everything and rebuild it to maintain a safe water and sewer system. So our situation's a little bit different than the water district. And there's been, you know, my editorial comment about the Brighton situation. There's been a lot in the press, and of course I know folks that work for the city of Brighton. They had a bunch in reserve to replace really expensive capital facilities. It wasn't to hoard cash. It was, it seems to me, a ton of money to replace a water treatment plant or replace a water purification system. Those are really expensive things to build, and it seems to me it makes good sense to have a certain amount in reserve to do those without having to raise rates and borrow money. That's my unofficial opinion about the Brighton situation.
You know, just one last thought, Brian. I'm really glad you're there. You know, you've got tons of experience in that position, and thank God you're there to help this crisis. I think Ben's doing a great job there. He really got a baptism by fire, and I think that's just more reason why it's great to have you there. I can't thank you enough in our city.
Well, that's awfully generous and kind of you.
Do we have any other questions? You were saying, Brian, that you know, you're expecting that shortfall, and you know, cuts are going to probably be imminent. When do you think that council will be looking at that?
So I've committed to City Council at their next meeting on May 18th to provide an overview of how we would manage this crisis from a financial standpoint. So it'll be an overview of how we would make cuts and in a priority order. So we're working on a total universe of cuts in the neighborhood of 10 million, but we wouldn't do all those right away. We would do those in order of priority, depending on if we absolutely need to do those things. So we'll walk through that on the 18th, talk about our reserve funds, have a discussion with council on how much they would be comfortable spending. We'll talk about the CARES Act funding that we receive through Adams County. We're working on a separate budget for that money. It has to be spent on COVID-19 related expenses, but we have some latitude there. So we'll talk about those three things on the 18th, plus give them our best estimate of what the revenue shortfall looks like as of May 18th anyway. So tune in, and you'll hear our best thinking at that time.
Brian, my question is, they keep talking about there might be a possible second wave. And when we talk about your reserves and everything and different programs, are they pre-planning now to be ready for a second wave? Even if it doesn't happen, it's better to be planned and nothing happened than starting to have to plan when it happens. Are they looking at, okay, now we know what we've done so far. what are we going to do if something happens and it's just as bad or worse?
Well, that's a good question. So we're essentially going to take our April revenue, once it's all booked in, which won't be until early June, and assume that that's indicative of what we'll have the rest of the year. Now, if we start to pull out of the crisis, if the safer at home order allows more businesses to open, and the worst, the revenue hit occurs in the month of April, then that projection is a really conservative projection, and we'll do better than that. But if there is a second wave, society and the economy have to shut down again, it seems to me taking that April revenue and assuming that that's what we'll see the rest of the year, that'll enable us to withstand this from a financial standpoint. Now, that's no guarantee we'll be out of this by the end of the year either. Interestingly, along with trying to figure out what to do with our 2020 budget, at the staff level, we're knee deep in the 2021 budget process. So, one tongue-in-cheek story about that is when you have no money, budgeting is easier. It's when you have some money that budgeting is the toughest. That's when you have to make tough decisions. So we're also assuming for 2021 that our budget is going to be significantly lower. I would rather have a conservative budget and have things turn out to be better than that. The hard part is we don't have, like a lot of agencies, we don't have fat in our budget. Everything in there goes to good use, and any cuts we make are painful. So making decisions about relative priority is really, really hard to do. It's impossible to cut. If we end up cutting 10 million, it's impossible to do that without it being painful. But it's a good point. The ability to sustain this is unlike any other crisis any of us have ever dealt with. Typically, again, our emergencies are weather related. You hunker down for 24 or 48 hours, the weather clears and you start to recover. And this just is nothing at all like that.
Is there a specific message that you would like to just say to our businesses?
Well, the most important thing I think you could convey on behalf of city government is city government understands that a key to the recovery effort is the recovery of businesses in our community. And that's why city council has dedicated, again, we're experiencing revenue losses, but city council said, let's put money, unbudgeted money, so additional expense on our budget, into the business community, because we understand how critical that is. It's critical on so many different levels. So along with helping businesses access state and federal programs, again, City Council thought it was important enough to put our own money into helping businesses. And I don't think this is, again, just a one-time thing, a token gesture to help the business community. I think we're gonna stay in it, and to the extent that you know what the needs are, that helps us dial in what sort of assistance we provide. So we're absolutely committed to providing that assistance and being good partners.
And how about the residents? Any last words for the residents?
Well, similar message. We think we have a role and a responsibility to help residents weather this storm. Again, I'm proud that we've kept most aspects of city government going, and we aim to keep doing that. A similar message to the extent that you hear about needs in the community amongst residents, share that information with us. Between city, county, and state government, we're all trying to fill gaps and help residents and businesses alike mitigate the impacts. So for us, it's having good information to act on. So any information, any things you hear helps us a lot. So thank you for being out in the community and having your ears to the ground.
Well, we want to thank you, and as a chamber, that you know that we are here for the city to help in any way that we can, just to help our community get through all of this.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. Thank you for all that you do. And if I can help in the future by coming back again, I'm happy to do that.